Welcome, Mikkel. Thank you for taking the time. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you are doing and who you are?
Yes, of course. So my name is Mikkel, and I'm the managing director and the founding director of DTU Skylab, which is the innovation hub of the Technical University of Denmark. So for the last 12 years, I've been building this innovation environment where we basically work to turn the ideas, the knowledge, the inventions from DTU into startups solutions in society. So we run a number of different acceleration programs, incubation programs, funding programs, but also a lot of collaboration with industry. And besides my role at Skylab, I'm also a business partner at the hard tech venture fund TechStation West and sit on numerous boards.
Cool. The reason for asking you to join the podcast is actually because I saw an article with you from Berlingske, where you said that Europe has slept throughout the last decade. What do you mean by that?
So I think for many years in Europe we had kind of the notion of us being, very much ahead when it comes to technology, innovation, companies. We have a very strong tradition in Europe with some amazing big companies, both in Denmark but also in rest of Europe. And all of a sudden, for the last couple of years, we've seen how, for instance, if you look at the car manufacturing industry, how the Chinese, for instance, have really become great at producing cars. The windmills, kind of the same history, right? And I think that caught us a little bit by surprise in Europe, how advanced, from a technological point of view, other regions of the world were. And also the fact that for actually quite a few years, if you looked at the investments into new startups in the world, I think the US roughly invests twice as much as whole Europe combined into venture funds and new startups. And I think that it took us a little while to see, how serious that was. And if you look at the leading new players in the world, dominant technology players, not many of them come from Europe. So we have some extremely important companies and we produce some really great startups, but the ones that are really defining the future, that are really the new standard, setting the new standards, they tend not to come from Europe. And I think it took us a little while to realize that. And that is, of course, extremely important because they are ones shaping tomorrow. And I think, then the Draghi report and all that stuff came out. And I think that was kind of a wake-up call also for politicians, etc. So I think now we are very aware in Europe, but it was kind of a little bit of a shock from being sleeping thing, everything is okay, till, whoa, perhaps we are actually having an issue here.
Why do you think that we ended up being kind of lagging behind in that regard, or what happened since that ended up being the case? Was that because of the funding, or what do you think?
No, I think also, of course, people working in the sector has been aware of many of these challenges, but I guess in Europe in general we have a high quality of life, etc. So you tend to think, okay, you look around, people have nice lives here. It's great societies. We also have these great companies, but if you look around, things are pretty great. If you're looking from technology, not looking at geopolitics, etc. But then, if you dig a little bit deeper and see, what are the ones that are really emerging and defining the future, attracting capital, creating new jobs, creating growth, perhaps you tend to be aware of that a little late. And I think the reason why it's so serious is also because, these successes, they will breed new successes. And you can see many of the successful spinouts from US, they come from former employees or management people from earlier successful companies. So I think they're, on a roll we have not been able to build in Europe so far, at least. So I think things are great in many aspects in Europe, but that can also be a little bit of a challenge because we don't necessarily see what's lying ahead.
It makes sense. I think, just from your perspective, what do you think will happen if we don't act in Europe? I think in terms of right now, digital sovereignty is a big topic or hot topic right now. Do you think we will, if we don't change things, will we then be even more dependent on other companies or other countries for their unique technologies and so forth? Or what do you think will happen?
Yeah, I guess that also, if you look into the Draghi report, I think these are some of the things he emphasizes. But a couple of things are at stake here, I think. So one is the strategic autonomy or digital sovereignty, as you mentioned. Of course, if we are dependent on solutions built elsewhere, we are not able to control, data flow, and these are, all solutions are not neutral. They come from something, right? So, of course, right now, if you look at the large language models, etc., a couple of actors are trying to build something that just did something in Switzerland, etc. But by far the dominant players are not from Europe. So it makes us very dependent. We don't necessarily want to be that, at least not in all aspects. So critical infrastructure, critical technologies, etc. But I think there's also something about where's the growth in the world, because the lifestyle we have right now, where we have been able to a large degree at least, have very well functioning societies in many places in Europe with great healthcare systems, etc. We had a strong focus on climate, for instance, in Europe and Denmark. And I think all these elements, you only have them if you are financially quite strong. So if you lose that edge, if you lose that being ahead, I think all the other elements, the quality of life, the healthcare system, the focus on sustainability will also suffer. So I think that is actually our way of life. Our identity is actually at stake at the not in the close future, but a little longer out there. But I think so. But I think also the whole conversation about these topics. You mentioned the digital dimension. The whole conversation has changed a lot. Within the last couple of years. So. I remember I did an interview like a year ago or 2 years ago, and that was about the forthcoming AI Act and AI regulations, etc. So very much focusing on how can we make sure we can regulate these things, and of course, which is still important. But I think the conversation has very much also started to focus on how could we make sure we build something that is significant, that can be a part of the global game. So I think the whole conversation around these things have also changed.
What do you think is the reason for Europe to be behind? Usually there's like this meme saying that the US innovate, China replicate, and Europe regulate.
Yeah.
Is that the reason for why we are lagging behind, or what's driving this dynamic?
Well, I think it's a combination of many things. Of course, there might be a little bit of truth to that, but it's not entirely true, I would say. I think there are many innovators and great innovators in Europe. But I guess we have been a little slow sometimes. I think that is a challenge. Of course, if you look towards the US, then they do have like one big market. We don't have a single market in Europe. So scaling a startup in Europe is more difficult than in the US in many aspects.
Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Because why is it not one market?
Yeah, so you have 27 different countries, and now there are these ideas coming up, a 28th regime, which would be like a way to have a pan-European startup, which I think, if done correctly, could be a great solution. A great solution. I think there are many details that might be a little difficult, but I think the fundamental idea is quite good. So you don't have to look into different tax laws or employee laws or employee laws, etc., etc. I think that is an advantage of a very large country like the US or China having like one big market. But that being said, there are different challenges. Some of it is also, which you indicated, I guess, more cultural driven. So I think there are differences between an American and a Chinese and a European culture. And even in Europe, there are many different cultures, of course. In some aspects, I think we should, of course, learn. When you travel to the US, if you meet with venture funds or if you meet with entrepreneurs or universities or whatever, you would probably notice a difference. And some of the things are probably, you can draw some inspiration from. I think also we should find out, okay, what are our uniqueness in our culture? What are our super strengths and play on those and not just try to replicate, because that won't work for us. But there's definitely a cultural element, and you can create incentives, etc., to try to work with that. And then finally, of course, there's also something about finances, about money. As I mentioned, VC investments in US are twice the amount of the whole Europe combined, and of course that matters because, especially in Europe, I think so. After Series B, I think we have a lot of great startups, but the moment they start scaling, there might be a little bit of a challenge in Europe. So last year, there was Deal Room did this report that analysis which showed that roughly 3% of European deep tech venture funds can lead a Series B plus, which means basically when you start scaling beyond the Series A. So if you're looking for more than 30 million euros, where the company becomes big, etc., it's only 3% of European deep tech venture funds that can actually lead that series. Yeah. What does that mean? You start looking elsewhere. Yeah. That is one of the reasons why so many are moving to the US, because there you do have these big funds that can actually lead the bigger series, etc. Valuations also high over there, etc. So I don't think by any means that is all about the money. I don't think that. I think culture, etc., is also extremely important to be successful. But of course, it does matter. It does matter. And luckily, there are elements looking into creating that different initiatives right now, looking at building European, pan-European growth funds, etc. So that is definitely also an element in this.
The cultural part is actually quite interesting, right? Because in the US, it seems like it's okay to invest in high risk companies. They might be unprofitable. They might have low value at the moment, but the opportunity out there is what drives it. Is it different in Europe? Do we see it the same way, or is that a big difference?
I think that it's also very different within Europe. So we have to really generalize here, right? Yeah. But I think in general that I think in the US you see more people celebrating also the failures and these classic stories of when you're in Silicon Valley, people are celebrating the last 8 failures and then they have a success or whatever. There is some truth to that. I think in we both come from Denmark, and I think also here it is a little more, for many people at least, a bit more of an embarrassment or something. You don't want to go down that road where you were the one that didn't succeed. And I think, of course, no one does. Of course, no one does. But do you see it as a stepping stone to actually succeeding afterwards? And I think perhaps that is also changing a little bit, but I think that fundamental mindset of the value of the failure is probably something where we could learn a little bit. But also, having the super big ambitions, because if you have ever attended some of these US pitch sessions, etc., all of them are claiming they'll be unicorns within the next 24 months or whatever. And of course they won't. But there's something about setting the bar, right? Okay, we are bloody aiming for the stars here. And you might succeed, you might not succeed, but if you don't aim that high, I'm pretty sure you won't succeed. So I think there's something about, really trying to make it all the way and also making these big bets. So if you look at the investors, okay, we're really gonna make a big bet on this guy or this woman. And I think, I guess as Europeans, we might be a little more risk averse in general, but of course that isn't general because there are many great players, both entrepreneurs and funds, etc., that are taking some of these risks. But I think as a European culture versus the American, I think there are differences there, and as you indicated, we are probably a bit more risk averse and perhaps also a little too humble to go out there and say, okay, I'm really gonna make this one big. This is really gonna change the world. We might want to see a little bit of proof before we claim that. But sometimes it might be okay to have ambitions. We all know that it's not necessarily a truth, but it's an ambition.
Cool. When you work with startups at DTU Skylab, how are you then approaching this part? Like, so you have a lot of cool technologies coming out of DTU. Mm-hmm. How are you preparing the startup guys and girls to actually embrace this and work towards this, and how do you also work with the larger ecosystem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so of course, in many dimensions, I would say, but if we can claim some kind of success in Skylab, and I think we can, of course, due to the many amazing students and researchers that have been through, but I think if there's something we succeeded in, is probably actually the cultural bit. Having some kind of cultural identity that people could relate to, but also could get inspired by. And I think that is probably the most important component of Skylab. We run many different, I think 27 or something different startup programs. And they're great, and they have great program managers. And if you look around the world, you'll find very similar programs around the world. It's not like we find the way of doing an incubation program, whatever. I think they're probably quite similar to many other good programs around. But so I always come down to the whole cultural aspect. And of course, then you need to define what is, so we're working with innovation, entrepreneurship. So what does innovative culture mean to us? That might also be different from person to person, from country to country, from region to region, etc. But at least for me, there are some obvious things in there. So, as we are an innovation hub, of course, we should be the ones pushing the boundaries a little bit. We talked about failing, taking some bets. There's something about that, risking a little bit. Might not always succeed, but, we need to put some ambition out there. So, pushing boundaries, being ambitious, etc., being explorative, that's kind of one, I would say, value or core element of the culture, which I think is important for Skylab. Another one would be the more. So many of the students and the researchers, they are very focused on both ethical matters, but also sustainability in the broader sense, like creating real impact in society, not only the financial impact, but also beyond the financial bit. I think that's extremely important and defines the vast majority of the startups we see. And then the last, and I think those two, many other ecosystems and hubs would kind of see it the same way. I think one of the things that is our superpower here in Denmark and the Nordics in general is basically openness and transparency. So if you look and trust, because if you look at these happiness surveys we have every year around the world, Finland, they always come out kind of top, and then next to Finland we come out, and Sweden and all. So basically the Nordic countries, they do very well. And if you look into those surveys, it's very much about trust. People kind of trust each other. They trust the neighbor. They also trust the government. They don't think the government's going to fuck you over. They have a fundamental trust. They might disagree and things, of course, but we do have a fundamental trust in society, and that is a little different than many other regions of the world. And I think that is one of the things that could be our unique advantage, and that's some things we're very strategically try to build upon in Skylab. So creating an environment where we built very much on trust, on openness, etc., because it actually goes very well with innovation. There are several studies showing that startups in innovation environments and hubs, etc., that actually share learnings, concerns, barriers, challenges, etc. With the other ones, they perform much better. They raise more capital than the ones that just hide away in an office. So that would give us an incentive to kind of make people meet each other, make sure they meet the people they wouldn't have met otherwise. So that is the third dimension of the culture. And how do you then work with culture? Because that is, of course, a little bit tricky in general. But these three elements that I just mentioned, so the openness and transparency, the trust, the pushing the boundaries, and also the impact bit, these three elements. So how do you work with that? And I think you need to approach it from different angles at the same time. So, of course, you need to build programs where this is an integrated part. It's all cultures, of course, about people. So you need to make sure you hire some people that can live their version of that culture, and also bring in mentors and etc. We have a lot of people from outside, from industry. We have 250 like super senior people from industry and venture and all sorts of stuff that are mentors for our startups. So this kind of walk the walk, talk the talk kind of thing. I think the way we run the organization should also reflect it. And then finally, I think actually architecture, the building, the surroundings they're in, you should already reflect it. Yeah. So let me give a few examples of this.
Sure.
So for instance, the pushing the boundaries. So if you walk into Skylab and you've been there, so it's super big, in the sense that I think it's 17 meters to the roof in one building.
Cool building.
Yeah, it's big and it's kind of rough. That was actually the biggest discussions with the architects. So it's a little bit rough. It's not polished. You would have robots. You would have a car in one corner. You would have people doing some welding. It's pretty rough. And the idea is, of course, that this should be a place where you get your hands dirty. You try out stuff. It might not be perfect, and if it's not, it's okay. We try again. It's not. It's not a perfect building. I like the architect. I think it's beautiful, but it's also a little bit rough, and that's very much attended. And so the whole pushing boundaries. So when I have so this is the architecture, but when I have these first conversation with new employees, I always tell them the same thing about we can forgive any mistake, but we cannot forgive if we don't try something. So and coming up with a few anecdotes on stupid stuff we have done previously, right? Events that didn't work out or whatever. But I think it's so much important that we encourage this. And then finally, we would bring in role models that would share their stories. And very often we say, it's great that you share your success. We love that, but you should also, share your fuck-ups, all the things that went wrong. And it's not all of them, of course, but I think it's very important to have a balance. So you don't think that people just woke up one morning with the perfect idea, the perfect team, and got funded the week after. There's a lot of
hardship as part of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that is kind of the pushing boundaries bit, and you could say the same with transparency, the superpower. Yeah. So again, Skylab, the architecture, it's extremely transparent. So if we have glass everywhere, you cannot hide away. And that was one of the most expensive thing about building Skylab, was actually that we wanted glass into the welding workshop or sheet metal workshop. The welding needs the carpet, but basically, so you could see all the additive manufacturing or the lab stuff going on or whatever. So you can see, okay, she knows about 3D printing. Oh, he seems to know how to work the lab bench or whatever. So you meet all the people you wouldn't have met otherwise. So the architecture is very much centered around this. And the way we book rooms, no one has an office in Skylab. I'm definitely the only director at DTU who does not have his own office. So basically everyone is blended together. So young students, senior professors, entrepreneurs, employees, etc., all blended together. And I think this is also a kind of way of encourage this openness and trust, etc. And also Skylab is a very open building, so the ones that are users, they can get access 24/7. You need a card to get in at night, but they can enter the building 24/7. And also, not all the workshop, but the one where we don't find safety concerns, they can also enter at night, build prototypes, etc. So I think the whole way of finding approaches where you can work with whatever culture, whatever values you find important, I mentioned the ones I find important here, and find different approaches, different angles to support that, I think is kind of the key.
Can you tell me a bit about how you take like the process from going from idea or new discovery to ending up at DTU Skylab until they are taking off or spinning out of the academia environment?
Yeah, sure. And the startup journeys are very different, of course. Fundamentally, we could say that most of these cases we see, they either come out of courses or education. So people are, studying something, they're having different topics on something, and then they come up with an idea, perhaps through a course, etc. And then they start working with that idea, they do exam, and then they start considering, perhaps this is a little bit more than just a study project, perhaps this could actually turn into something. Then they approach us and say, okay, I have this idea, could we talk a little bit about that? And then it evolves from there. The same could go with the researchers. They work on something and they approach us. But we found out pretty quickly that not everyone reached out. Not everyone are extrovert, not enough to do it, basically, or perhaps they are not sure that's a great idea, and perhaps they feel, it could be embarrassing if I've come with a bad idea, and trust me, it's not, most ideas are not brilliant to start with.
Nope.
But we pretty quickly found out that we also needed to reach out, being proactive. So we have different systems. So we have something called innovation partners, and they are essentially business developers or startup coaches working with the researchers. But instead of only waiting in Skylab for the projects to come to them or the startups to come to them, they're actually proactively out in the research environment. So any research department would have affiliated one innovation partner from Skylab who would help the department with, innovation workshops, or just talk to the different research units and, so what are you guys working on? What's happening here? Okay. Have you thought about this and this? Does it have a commercial potential? Or perhaps they want to license this out and they go that path. Perhaps they're thinking, this could be something, perhaps we should see if we could get a postdoc to run this as a business, and then we help start building that structure around it. So it's not only us waiting for the ideas to come to us, and I think that was a very important learning in the beginning, that not all the great ideas, all the great people, they don't necessarily find you. There are, of course, a group of people, kind of the usual suspects, kind of, that would find you, and they would be proactive, they would come to you with your idea, but you need to have a strong outreach at a university to say, okay, it's also okay you come to us with a terrible idea, actually, and come to us without an idea. You just think it sounds interesting, this stuff we're doing, and then we'll see if we can match you up with someone. I think that has been a super important learning. So, and then there's actually also a third way in, because these are the students and researchers that come with an idea to us, or we find them. But sometimes also the other way around, that industry comes to us with a challenge, and then we facilitate these innovation challenges where we run different programs, and we have students and researchers who are saying, okay, this company or these companies have this kind of solution. Let's spend 1 day, 2 weeks, several months on developing concepts or ideas that could address this challenge. Let's look at new solutions. And when we do that, sometimes it happens, of course, that they just get some concepts and they work with that, take that forward within the company. But sometimes, great small ideas come up, and the company say, it would be great if someone would, work with this. we might even be a customer in the future. And then, someone built a startup around that. But it's more, challenge-driven, basically. So that is also one way in we see. And from there, then we basically, from the earliest stage of this is still a pre-startup at this point, they have not created a company yet where they come to us with an idea. Then we have different programs where you validate the idea, the technology development, looking at business markets, etc. So we have different programs, and fundamentally it's a funnel, you could say. So everyone can approach us. Everyone could get the first, touch point with a startup advisor, a startup coach. And then if you want to apply for the more dedicated programs, the first ones are pretty easy. Then, we can give funding, etc. in the end, grants. Then it becomes increasingly difficult to get through. It's not, super, super difficult, but it becomes increasingly difficult, which also means that they need to show more commitment, work more with their concept, and then finally spin out a company.
You mentioned the industry as well. Mm-hmm. I know from the clients that we also work with that many of them are finding it hard to go from idea to actually something that's sellable or something that can be scaled across Europe. Do you have any experience with kind of innovation or venture building within corporates, whether it's then like entrepreneurship, they want to spin out something completely new, or whether they want to do some more intrapreneurship, so they want to improve the existing business?
Yeah, so we have discussed that quite a lot, and we haven't run dedicated venture builder programs for larger companies. We have not done that. We have a lot of people actually working for us who did that in previous jobs, but we have not offered as a service. It might make sense at some point. I just think that is one. We had to focus strategically, and we decide, okay, that would take to do that well. There are some great players that do it out there, sure. Right? And we thought, okay, it seems like they're already someone at this. So basically, we're not supporting that. So it's more on a conceptual level. We are working with these challenges, not venture building for a company as such, as a service. We don't do that.
Okay. So you do partnerships instead. So these
basically, companies, organizations will come to us and say, okay, we are looking at a set of challenges or a theme or whatever, and then we develop, co-create concepts, not build the company for them, but we will co-create concepts together with them, potential solutions, and the company can take that further, build a venture, or sometimes a company spins out of DTU because they do it in collaboration with them, which is fine, but it's not. I wouldn't call it venture building. It's something a little different.
Yeah. Do you think the process is very different compared to what you are doing or what would happen in a corporate?
I guess that some of the mechanisms would be the approval processes, etc., is very different in a corporate, right? Yeah. I read a couple of years ago that the average lifetime for a corporate innovation department is like 3 years or something before they shut it down. Is extremely short. And of course, it's because I guess someone wants something new to happen, and they say, okay, let's come up with new ideas, new concept, whatever. They build an innovation department, and then it turns out that it's not yet a part of the core business. Perhaps it's not totally clear what the KPIs are, etc. And then at some point when they need to cut down, then they kill the innovation department. At least that's how the story goes, right? So I think there's something about these structures are very different from building a independent startup. But some of the processes and looking at the markets, etc., are of course the same. And of course, also obviously, the corporates, if they have some huge advantages because they have a supply chain, they have customers, they probably had a lot of capital if they're successful. So there are a lot of the fundamentals where they actually have a head start, as a corporate player. But sometimes, I guess, they also want to take it out the corporate culture, because that's where the culture come in, right? So if you just put on a pair of sneakers and paint the wall yellow instead, do you have this entrepreneurial culture? Probably not. It might take a little more, and then you could try to build that stuff, or you could put it somewhere else. And I think that is also definitely interesting, seeing what happens if you take those kind of things outside the corporate environment to kind of infuse it with another mindset or another culture.
You're also part of RISE Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I'm one of the founding members of RISE Europe, and it was initiated by Unternehmertum, which is a very large innovation hub in Munich. Mm-hmm. It is associated with the Technical University of Munich, but it's actually a privately owned entity owned by Susanne Klatten, one of the main stakeholders of BMW. And they've been close partners and friends of ours for many years. And it was actually their initiative. So they invited me and a guy called Jean-Michel from Magarinov in France, and to Munich and said, okay, they had this idea that we should do some kind of pan-European network. And addressing some of the challenges we just started this conversation out with. And so basically, the idea was, okay, can we give access to markets? Can we give access to capital, perhaps? Can we give access to knowledge, to research environments, to infrastructure, to all these sorts of things beyond our own local ecosystem? So, for instance, if I have a startup building an autonomous vehicle or a car, whatever, EV in Skylab, we don't have a car manufacturing industry in Denmark. So, if we need partners, where would I go? But they do in Munich. So, they're pretty excellent at it, actually. So there would be, having that connection could create some very, very strong synergies. So the idea was kind of to find these leading startup hubs in Europe and connect them. So we did. So we identified 20 people, 21 people that we thought they are, as persons, they have built something. They are heading some kind of innovation hub or something similar. They are willing to share, and work together. And they represent, a strong ecosystem somehow. And we identified 20 people, or 21 in Europe in total, including the three of us, and then brought them together. And now we're doing all sorts of things together, running, for instance, we just ran a accelerator, a pan-European accelerator for AI startups, and it was initiated by ETH in Zurich. And I don't know how much you know about them, but they have like 21 Nobel laureates. They're world leading, always, these ranking on computer science, they're always top, 5 or whatever in the world. They're like super, super strong within AI. And they wanted to initiate this AI accelerator, invited us in, which was perfect because, we would never be able to build that ourselves. We have a strong AI environment in Denmark, and we are partnering with AI Pioneer Center in Denmark, so we could kind of make that, connection here in Denmark, and then send a startup team to take part of the accelerator with all these global international teams. So that, one specific example. But it's also, about learning from each other, basically. Finding out how to build these programs, etc., and making and the network, of course, being connected to industry outside your own sphere, your own local neighborhood, country, etc. And then finally, I think one of the things that really struck me afterwards when we combined. So we've been running for 3 years now. And we are 21 people from 15, I think, different countries in Europe, all representing an ecosystem. And if you look at these ecosystem combined, I think last year we had we supported in total more than 5,000 startups altogether. And the alumni of those organizations, ecosystems, they raised 6-point-something billion euros in venture capital, which is roughly 10% of all European tech venture capital. So you have basically 20 people or 21 people that somehow is connected with 10% of all European investments or startups that are invested in, which is significant. And I think what that creates is a voice. because if Mikkel goes to EU and says something, they might not listen. Yeah. But when we do it as Rise Europe, because we represent such a broad network of really great startups and players and universities and researchers, etc., I think they really listen. So actually, we were kind of a little bit surprised, but we were actually invited to Ursula von der Leyen's office, and we went there. Not all of us, but the founding group went there and met with her, etc. Afterward, met with the commissioner for startups, Ekaterina, and it's very clear because we have this joint network or whatever we should call it, we also get a voice. So we can actually, make the startups' voices be heard, also on a political level. And now I'm also been invited to this Startup and Scale-Up Forum under the Commissioner Katarina Sarjava. And basically, we're working with this startup and scale-up strategy for Europe. So I think some of these things would probably not happen without Rise Europe, and I think that is extremely important.
You're stronger together.
Yeah. It's simple. It's simple old wisdom, but it kind of works, right?
But it also moves, like as you also mentioned earlier, the idea of being one market across Europe, right? So if all these different communities across Europe already speak together, then that is kind of maybe the grassroots movement that's needed to push like policymakers as well.
Yes, exactly, and that is some of the stuff that we are working on. Is exactly that, trying to say, okay, how can we can as individuals or ecosystem, whatever, we can support it, but there should also be some political support. And if we do this together, we might actually be able to address some of the challenges that everyone sees in Europe. So I think, that is very true.
Have you? I kind of see two movements right now in the EU. One thing is that it seems like, from what I hear on the pipes, is that that funding is going, like people are holding back on funding right now. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we have this ambition of more independence and digital sovereignty that probably speak more to that we should invest more in EU. Is that also your impression, that there is these two, I don't know, conflicting situations happening right now? Or?
Yeah, definitely. It seems like funding is decreasing at the moment. And also I think the ones that are raising new funds, building new venture funds, they are also struggling a little bit. So investing into funds is also decreasing. So that is, of course, not great for the current scenario. So I think we need to, of course, these things fluctuate, but it looks like a significant drop this year. But let's see once the year is over, etc. But that is a challenge. I see the same thing as you mentioned. And then, of course, we need to find out, okay, are there any mechanisms that could kind of turn this around, or any opportunities that we're not currently working with? And when you look at funding, of course, one of the first things that would come to mind are the pension funds, right? Because they are some of the actors that actually do have a lot of capital. And we do have a lot of capital in Europe. It's not like a lack of capital in Europe. We have a lot of money in Europe. We have a lot of capital in Europe. But they're just not deployed in the venture world, in the startup world. So I think, I guess there are many different statistics on this, but I think the last number I read was that somewhere between 0.01 to 0.02% of the pension funds actually go into startup, which is nothing. It's in Europe. I think it's probably, and as far as I know, it's around 100 times higher in the US. So, so it's still small. It's only 2% in the US, but that is, very, very far from the 0.01 or 2% in Europe. So there's something about that. That might be one of the ways of unlocking these. Also, the Series B plus issue we talked about earlier, scaling issue.
But I guess that goes back to the other challenge that you mentioned earlier with the culture part, right? Because it seems like the pension funds are are quite risk averse, and even though when they then go out and take a risk, I think what was the company called that did batteries in Northvolt, yeah. A good example of how media just slaughtered the pension funds afterwards, right? And I guess that's part of the culture, right? It's not.
Yes, and I think in the Northvolt case was such a pity for so many reasons. But one of the reasons is basically that it's been a symbol of something that I fundamentally believe is wrong, because the story in the media was, how could we spend our pension, you and I, our money when we retire, how could we spend that on such a gamble, right? But that is not the logic of startup investments. You should not have one big bet. You should have many bets. And that, if you invest into 10 startup companies in a venture fund, not all of them will succeed. That happens in no funds. So perhaps a couple of them succeed, whatever. So I think that is something about the risk profile and the fundamental logics of venture investments, and you cannot just take one case out. And of course, you should not only be exposed to one large case. You should be exposed to many cases, and some of them will go bankrupt, and some will succeed big time. And if we look to the US and see, it's that is a significant amount that is invested from pension funds into startup there. And I'm sure they also do it because they get a decent return, right? And that's another thing, because actually that has changed, because if we look at the return of the European venture investments, so the venture funds in Europe right now has a return that is on par with the American venture funds. So if you look at deep tech investments in Europe, they have the same, the funds roughly have the same return. There are many more in the US, but we are roughly on the same level on return. So meaning that you can actually do investments into these European venture funds and get a decent return, which is of course what you want looking at a pension fund. And they should not put 30% of their pension into venture funds. That's not what I'm saying. But imagine if they put 1%, that would really change a lot.
Yeah. So if we let's play a game here. Let's imagine that someone has a startup or a startup idea, or let's actually say that it's proven business in Denmark, and they want to scale to the rest of Europe. Whether that business is spinning out of corporate or DTU Skylab or something else. How should they go about scaling across Europe? From your experience?
Yeah, well, it depends very, very much on which sector, the industry, etc. Yeah. So I think,
but let's take an example. Maybe let's go with healthcare, because that's something that's quite regulated across Europe.
Yeah,
and it might be difficult because there's also different pathways for medical or healthcare,
and that is actually true. And unfortunately, if we look at healthcare, we often hear that they choose the US because they don't have to look at 27 different regulations, right? So that is definitely a challenge. But so there's definitely something on a political level and systemic level that needs to be solved. But I think probably if you come out of Skylab, your example, you're probably not going to take on 27 countries at the same time, right?
No.
When they come out of Skylab, they're still very small companies that need to scale. So I think you need to identify the 1, 2, 3 markets that are actually where you have a chance, that are significant in size and in profile, etc., and start with them. So is Poland interesting? Is France interesting? Germany, whatever. Germany is a very big market in many countries. Yeah. So our neighbors in Germany might be a very good place to start, and you might choose a few European countries to start out with, which would be pretty big task for a company with a handful of employees. It's not like they have a marketing department with 200 employees or anything. So I think finding out which has the right market size and dynamics where you have approach, and also of course it's all about where do we have some kind of advantage. Could be basically you know some of the right people, and you have collaboration with a supplier. It could be I don't know, whatever. But I think find these little advantages, the right markets, the right structure in those markets, and start with those.
So currently there are no workarounds to the 27 markets. There's no is it going through RISE Europe to actually get that exposure and figure out where would it be relevant to go, or is there some way of working around the 27 markets, individual markets?
So it depends a little bit about what you mean. So one is which markets might be right for you, and another one is the legislative, and the whole, those barriers that might be, and RISE Europe has no influence on that whatsoever. Of course, perhaps we can influence the policymakers a little bit, but we have no real decision power there, of course. But what we can do is make the right introductions. So we can introduce you to some of the right partners, potential customers, potential suppliers, whatever it is. That part we can do, and the other part we can advocate for, but it's up to the politicians. It's definitely outside our realm. So I could put another EU perspective in, because I think that this is something that we could do, and this is also something we'll be advocating for in RISE Europe. I think the logic of EU as an organization, when it comes to innovation, has been a little different from the logic of, for instance, research. So if you look at research support from EU, which is significant, of course, you try to support excellent research, basically, right? Yeah. You always talk about excellence when you talk about research, which makes sense. If you look at the innovation ecosystems, I think the approach has been a little different. I think the majority of the calls has been about these widening countries, etc. So basically making sure that everyone has a innovation capacity. So which means that you would lift the lesser developed regions to perform better, perhaps. And we have been part of several projects where we are also a part of these consortia, whatever, where basically our role is to support some of the lesser developed ecosystems or hubs or whatever it is, which is cool. But I think you're just not going to compete with the US or China by doing so. I think you also need to have some kind of new structure, new logic, where you, as you do in research, you try to find the ones that are already advanced, that always has a significant track record, that has a proven track record, and try to lift them to the next level, kind of raising the bar, not lifting from the bottom. I think that is definitely something that we could do in Europe, or the European Union could do. Find new mechanisms to really raise the bar instead of lifting from the bottom when it comes to innovation, ecosystems, hubs, etc. Yeah. I think that has been quite a challenge, and hopefully that will change. But I think, I think that is also, back to the whole cultural thing about, where to put that leading star, what is the level of ambition, etc. And I think when it comes to the innovation initiatives, that's been a little off that logic. I think it makes sense to do the whole, developing the lesser developed regions and inspiring them, etc. I think that makes a lot of sense, but I think you should definitely also lift the boundaries, lift it in the top. Yeah,
that makes sense. You earlier talked about these the 28th nation, I think you called it, regime. Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? How would that work, and what's the ambition there?
Yeah. So that is a suggestion on EU level. Yeah. And it comes in many forms and shapes. So right now it is a part of the startup and scale-up strategy. It's mentioned in there. The idea is basically that you can create a pan-European company. So you don't have to register in Denmark and Italy and then in France and then etc. But you somehow could create some kind of company structure that works throughout Europe to make it easier, to basically reduce some of those barriers that are already there, and then could also be involve things like employment contracts, etc., making it a bit easier, all the regulative stuff. That is the fundamental idea. And that should push towards the idea of a single market and, being one Europe and not many 27 divided ones. And then how this is, implemented is, I think, and it can be thought of in many different ways, and there are many different takes on what is important, what is realistic, etc. I do really think that if we could create this pan-European company structure for startups that are simple, would make simple for make hires in other countries and enter markets, etc. I think that could potentially be a game changer. But of course, there's also all the national decision making, all the national rights, all the countries that which makes this a little tricky. But let's see.
Timelines are, of course, always a dangerous thing to talk about. But what do you think would be the timeline for something like that? Is it's probably not something that's up next year, but it's is it 5-10 years? Or?
Before implemented, it would be difficult. So, but basically in the strategy, I think in general, so this strategy that were put out from the commissioner's side, we were involved in this Startup Scalab forum. Many of them are, many of the core elements are starting to be implemented already from 26. I think actually finding a solution to the 28th regime is probably not the ones that will, work out within next year. So I think that is extremely complicated. And basically, I guess that is beyond my political skills to figure that out. But I'll tell you that at least I'm pretty sure that there are many different perspectives and needs and wishes, etc., which complicates that matter quite a bit. But hopefully, perhaps they cannot get the full model, but perhaps they can get just some of the fundamentals working, which would be a beginning.
Cool. So I think we've been around most of the overarching challenges, right? So we had the multiple markets in Europe. We covered the funding situation and also the cultural aspects. Thinking about all this, Mikkel, are you then are you feeling good about the future of Europe? Are you think you're moving in the right direction?
Am I optimistic?
Are you optimistic?
Yes, I'm always optimistic. Yeah. Yes, I am optimistic. I do believe we have some pretty significant challenges ahead, and it's even been made even more complex and with the whole geopolitical situation, which is terrible. But that being said, if we look at innovation, I think I am optimistic. I do believe there are solutions to this. Also, if you look at some of the fundamentals, if you look at research environments that actually foster these new ideas, etc. So I think 30% or whatever of the top 20 research environments within computer science, within engineering, etc., are actually in Europe, or 30%, 30% of those. That is very significant. So we do have the cutting-edge research institutions and people that come up with novel ideas. They are located in Europe. Also, we have great educational systems in Europe. Also, we have a great quality of living in Europe, like healthcare and etc. So I think we have some of the fundamentals are definitely there, which makes me optimistic because now we're starting to focus on the commercialization and all the stuff to make sure that the ideas are actually turned into innovation and turned into value in society to the benefit of people and society. So I am optimistic because I see the fundamentals are there. There are new things we need to do. We need to have a stronger emphasis and stronger focus on actually commercializing these ideas. We need to have focus on the culture and, perhaps also universities make incentives for professors and, entrepreneurs university to work with these things. And perhaps that we could be inspired by the US. there are also solutions perhaps in deploying more capital to these startups. I guess it has within recent years become more, it's not just a super small niche in society. You would have lions stand on television. You would have normal people doing business angel investments and stuff like that. So I think it's becoming a more integrated part of society. Hopefully that can increase investments also. So I think we definitely have the fundamentals. We also have possible solutions and opportunities. So yes, I am optimistic, even though the challenges are big.
I guess there's also just a lot of attention now.
Yes,
from across the Europe region, right? So that's very promising as well.
Absolutely, I think the attention, and you must say that this Mario Draghi, he really played an important role, because it's kind of every politician in every country kind of woke up after the letter and the Draghi report. So yes, there's a lot of attention. There's a lot of awareness, which hopefully can be turned into action.
Yeah, really cool. Now we mentioned the Draghi report a few times, so I think we will put a link in.
Do that
in the description.
Yes.
But thank you very much, Mikkel. That was super exciting to hear about this.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.